BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Good morning. Today I'm in Oxford for two major conferences, the Oxford Farming Conference and the Oxford Real Farming Conference. The first is traditionally seen as attended by the established and larger farms, and the Real Farming Conference has a wider scope with more smaller farms, organic producers and artisan food producers. But both together represent UK farming as a whole. It's a time of change for farmers at the moment, change in the way they're paid, what's expected of them, and after endless wet weather and one of the worst harvests on record, a time when finances are tight and stress levels are very high. You may remember farmers rallying in Whitehall protesting at the new government's changes in inheritance tax on agricultural businesses, so there is a lot to talk about. Let's start at the Oxford Farming Conference, based in the marbled corridors here at the examination schools, where the delegates have started to arrive.
I'm here to enjoy the Oxford Farming Conference, which is always the start of the agricultural year. Obviously the industry feels a little bit bruised since the budget last year, so it'll be interesting to see what all the devolved ministers have to say, how they're going to support our industry going forward.
It's my first time to be here. Agriculture, as we know, is in a very challenging position, and the topic of the event here, Facing Change, I think is very fitting at the present time.
I'm particularly looking forward to Steve Reed on his talk to see how where policy will be going forward.
I am interested in nature-friendly farming and how farming business can thrive, so I hope to learn a lot about that.
The theme for the conference this year is Facing Change, Finding Opportunity. This year's chair is Jeff Sansom.
Well, the conference started in 1936, so next year we'll be at 80th conference, 90 years. We missed a few years in the wartime. So I think looking back and taking that long perspective about the changes that the industry has faced in those 90 years is a very valuable thing to do. The conference has grown and grown and grown. It was quite technical when it started, but it's at one time it had a reputation of being quite establishment. But quite honestly, in the last decade, well, the last 30 years since I first attended, it's changed dramatically. It's very inclusive. It has a range of presentations. It's probably quite unique because it's not all technical, it's not all industry. We get some good international perspectives, we get some good out-of-industry perspectives, which help put our own challenges and opportunities into a great perspective.
Farming has been in the headlines. There is a lot of anger out there at the moment, especially over inheritance tax, a lot of pressure on farmers because of changes in the budget. So how do you think the feel of this conference will be?
I think it will inevitably reflect the stresses and the immediate short-term pressures and indeed anger, which is justifiable out there. And when we have our political session with the Secretary of State and the devolved ministers, I'm sure some of that will emerge. But that session in particular, I'm very keen to hear what the Secretary of State has to say around a new deal. And we need to give him time to not only address the conference but also to listen, to maybe get this relationship into a slightly better place than it is at the moment.
Change is a challenge for farmers, isn't it? But this conference is titled Opportunities as well as Change. So where are the opportunities in the changing farming system at the moment?
There will be opportunities. There's always opportunities around productivity. We'll have two fascinating presentations in terms of opportunities within the science, possibly some controversial discussions around opportunities with gene editing. And likewise, we'll have quite a few presentations from what we call our inspiring farmers, which are farmers who, despite many challenges, have made some great businesses in some quite different directions. So I think there'll be quite a few examples of where the opportunities are.
That's Jeff Sansom. Well, I'm now walking down the road to the Oxford Real Farming Conference and to just one of the many spaces around Oxford that they're using for their delegates to meet. Well, we've just come into the brand new Cheng building, which is behind Jesus College. And with me is Hester van Hensbergen, who is chair.
Well, so it's the 16th gathering of the Oxford Real Farming Conference, and we've got over 150 sessions across 19 venues, and we've got 2,000 people gathering in person, plus thousands joining us online. Certainly a lot of farmers are feeling really disaffected and isolated. And the amazing thing about the conference is that people get the chance to come together, meet like-minded people, re-energise for the year ahead, feel positive and excited about what they can do on their farms with or without the support of wider government and politics.
We have got a lot of concern from farmers about the impact that changes are having on them. They're being asked to do a lot for the environment, for food production. They're being charged increased national insurance payments for employees, and also with the payments from government falling away as well. How do you think they will feel about the future of farming just over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's a really challenging economic and political environment for farmers at the moment. What we're interested in focusing on is innovative farm technique that can help farmers transition to more environmental food and farming. And we're really interested in looking at things that don't cost a lot of money. Low-cost interventions is a really keen focus for us this year. So we're looking at things like agroforestry. We're also interested in the challenge of something like soya-based feeds for livestock. How do we transition away from importing masses of soya? So we're looking at homegrown proteins. So we're looking at the possibilities of legumes for livestock feeds. And we're looking at the possibilities of tree fodder as well in this conference. So lots of really practical take-home possibilities that are low cost for farmers and that people can really go home next week and apply on farm.
That was Hester van Hensbergen, who is the chair of the Oxford Real Farming Conference. One of the sessions organised by the ORFC is on misinformation in farming news. Hazel Healy is from DeSmog, an investigative environmental outlet, and they are running the session.
We'll be unpicking some of the prominent narratives and conspiracy theories that have got attached to food and farming, and looking at how certain groups and individuals are trying to piggyback discontent in the countryside, whether that's particular political agendas or being against any green changes or being against any form of government regulation around climate.
How difficult is it for anyone reading these things to know what's true and what isn't?
The first step is really to have this public conversation and really, sharing this idea that do we want our conversations about complex political and environmental issues around the future of food and farming in the UK to be based on fact or fantasy, and then thinking about ways to tackle it. If you want to get practical, social media platforms can bring in policies around how they handle misinformation. There isn't a huge appetite for that at the moment, but in the case that they choose to do that and act responsibly, they can label content, they can point readers to alternative viewpoints, or they can reduce its visibility through tweaking algorithms, or they can remove it altogether.
How worried are you that quite a few social media platforms now have decided that they're going to stop having fact checkers?
We're really worried that with more misinformation circulating, it's going to make it harder for farmers to really reach with the government consensus and come to meaningful policy recommendations that can address the crises that's affecting farming in this country. The challenge for us is bringing the context, raising digital literacy, explaining and spreading information as much as we can so that the audience and consumers can be clear, who they're dealing with.
That was Hazel Healy from DeSmog. Well, now I'm back at the Oxford Farming Conference, where the Secretary of State will be speaking today about his new plan for change. And change has been ongoing for farmers since Brexit. Under the EU system, farmers were paid subsidy based on the amount of land they farmed. That's being replaced by 4 different approaches in the nations of the UK. They're all moving towards a system where farmers get rewarded for environmental improvements. In Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, they continue to get direct payments at the moment. But in England, the phase-out started back in 2021, with them ending in 2027. In England, a new system of public money for public goods was established, with payments made to farmers under the Environmental Land Management Scheme for things like improving soil or planting hedges. Well, Dieter Helm is Professor of Economic Policy at the University of Oxford. He's been described as the architect of the public money for public goods policy. I asked him how he thinks it's going.
In the scheme of things, actually early days. It's a transition and quite a lot's happened. Not as good as it should be, not as fast as I would like, but not too bad.
Well, you say the transition is taking place, and we're now at the stage that payments are being significantly phased out in England. A farm business, for instance, expecting around £30,000 this year from the basic payment scheme will now get around £7,000. That is a big reduction. Are the schemes ready, though, to replace that lack of payment from the basic payment scheme?
I think that's been a big disappointment about how this new framework's been put in place. I mean, ELMS is a perfectly coherent structure.
That's the Environmental Land Management Scheme.
Our new scheme. And if you're going to take the money away from people under one scheme and allocate the money in a different way, it's the same amount of money, by the way, you're just shuffling the cards around, then it's beholden upon you to be pretty damn clear as to what you're going to pay out for when you're not paying out under the basic farm payment. And that's not been done well at all, and it's very unclear.
Yeah, so why? Why do you think the government, under so many successive secretaries of state, have not defined exactly what these schemes are and how it's being paid? That's really frustrating for farmers who have to plan ahead.
It's extraordinarily frustrating for all. And part of it is just not putting the proper resources in to do the job properly. The kinds of skills and knowledge and indeed technology you need to work out how to run this new system are quite different from the old Common Agricultural Policy. For example, you do need digital data. You do need to know what's going on the land. You do need to know what these public goods are. You do need to know what improvements are going to be made. You do need to know how to validate them when they happen. And, too long, DEFRA, and I think the environment agencies in this box too, have basically remained as analogue organisations. And if you don't have the technology, you don't put the skills in place and you don't put the resources in place, what do you think's going to happen?
There's also another question about how these schemes are run as well. Now, Charlotte Smith interviewed you 8 years ago, and I'll give you a quote from that interview. You said, "If we fudge this stuff and try to get by with the existing expertise with just a bit more added on, just get a few more civil servants and we'll be fine, that won't work. We really have to think about the institutions as much as the policy." Have we done that?
No, is the answer. And hearing my words back from a long time ago, I'm pleased that I haven't changed my mind about those. I mean, DEFRA's not fit for purpose. It's very straightforward. And neither is the Environment Agency for the framework we're taking place. What we're doing is looking out the back window of how the schemes were run in the past and thinking if we put a few more sticky plasters and a few more civil servants in place, somehow it's all going to be fine. And it's perfectly understandable that farmers look at this in horror.
Well, later this morning, the Secretary of State, Steve Reed, will tell farmers here that he will boost farmers' profitability and sustainability as part of the plan for change that the government has. You said DEFRA's not fit to deliver your vision of public money for public goods. So how do we get there in time for farmers not to fail before it happens?
Well, the answer is the government in particular needs to get its act together, and very quickly. It's even more urgent than when I said it 8 years ago. Problem doesn't go away because you close your eyes and hide under the duvet and hope it's not going to be too cold tomorrow.
Professor Dieter Helm will bring you more from the farming conferences tomorrow here in Oxford, including an interview with the Secretary of State, Steve Reed, and the devolved agriculture ministers. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Beatrice Fenton. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.